Hi, everybody. Welcome to the online lecture for Chapter 12, which is about deception and deceptive communication. This is the last chapter of our textbook before we get to the final exam. So when you hear the word deception or the idea of deceptive communication, what comes to mind? Is it great big lies that have terrible consequences? Is it little white lies that you might tell in a relationship? Is it motivated by hurt or anger, or is it maybe motivated by trying to help someone save face and to be polite to somebody? We'll explore all of those ideas in this chapter. So what makes a statement a lie? There are three elements of deception. So if these three things are in place, that means a statement is a lie, okay? Number one, the sender must know the information is false. So if I'm the sender and you're the receiver and I'm telling you something, for it to be a lie, first I have to know that it's false. I have to know it's untrue. Secondly, I have to be transmitting that information to you on purpose. You don't overhear me say it. You don't stumble across a note on my desk that you shouldn't have read. No, I am transmitting it to you. And thirdly, the sender must be attempting to make the receiver believe the information. So I'm telling you something I know isn't true. I'm telling it to you on purpose, and my intention is for you to believe it. If all three of those are in place, we can say that I am lying or I am engaging in deceptive communication. So given those three elements of deceptive communication, what would make a false statement not a lie? Well, remember, in order to be a lie, it has to have the intention to deceive behind it, right? So you might tell somebody something that is untrue, but you didn't intend to deceive them by telling them that. So one thing is, it's not a lie if you believe what you're saying is true. Maybe you and your friend have been waiting for your new laptop computers to come in, and you heard that they were in, so you tell your friend, oh, our new computers are in, we can go pick them up. And your friend goes and finds out that they're not in after all, that you were misinformed, and you repeated that to your friend. Well, you didn't lie to them. You believed that that fact was true. Secondly, it's not a lie if you don't intend for others to believe what you're saying. Now, how would that work? Well, think about all the cultural tropes and all the cultural cliches and sayings that we have. For example, if I said to you, if I'm late for another meeting, I'm going to be in really hot water with my boss. Well, is there any hot water involved? Is that statement a lie? The boss isn't going to dunk me in hot water. But I don't intend for you to take that literally. I am assuming that you're going to know what that cultural expression means. How many times as a kid did you say, if I'm late getting home today, my mom will kill me, right? Well, is that a lie? It's untrue, but it's not a lie because you don't intend for the other person to literally believe you. Now, another element of deception is that you cannot lie to yourself. The process of deception is interpersonal. Okay, and this is a hard one for a lot of people to get their heads around because we often say I was lying to myself about that. I was lying to myself to believe that my boyfriend and I would work out, or I was lying to myself to believe that I was going to pass that class, or something like that. We say that all the time. But according to the definitions we're working with here, you can't lie to yourself. The process of deception is interpersonal. And think about why that is. Number one, for something to be a lie, you have to know it's untrue. That's the first element of deception. Well, if you know it's untrue, how can you lie to yourself, right? You know it's untrue, you're telling it to somebody else deliberately, and you want to make them believe it's true. That's the definition we're working with here. So just going from square one, you know it's untrue. How can you know something is untrue and at the same time believe it to be true? According to this definition, that is impossible. So you cannot lie to yourself. I know many of you may agree or disagree with that idea and try to make an argument for the fact that, oh, well, I was lying to myself about this or that. But just remember, for purposes of this class and for this discussion, we're assuming that the process of deception is interpersonal. Let's look at 4 different types of deceptive acts or lies that we might commit or that other people might use with us. Okay, the first one is falsification or the outright lie. Think about if you told your significant other that you had to work late when you really were doing something else that they wouldn't approve of. Okay, that's an outright lie. And we do that for a lot of reasons, and we'll get into some of those in a minute. Exaggeration, overstating something that is true in principle. Someone might ask you if you like something and you say, oh, you love it, it's fantastic. That's kind of a lie, a deception. You're not that enthusiastic about it, but it's true in principle. You do feel favorably toward it, right? The third type of deceptive act, omission, is leaving out parts of the story to create a false impression. So a lie of omission is when you leave out a material fact that would make a difference to the person that you're talking to. I'll give you an example. Imagine that you and a friend were talking about getting an apartment together next year. And your friend comes to you and says, I found a fantastic apartment. It's only going to cost us $200 a month each, but we have to sign the lease this afternoon. So come on, we got to get over there right away. And you think, oh, wow, that's fantastic. $200 a piece. You get there and there are 2 other people there to sign the lease as well. There are 4 of you altogether. Maybe you don't know those other 2 people. And you say to your friend, hey, wait a minute. When you said it was going to be $200 a piece, you didn't tell me that was based on 4 people sharing the apartment. I don't want to share an apartment with that many people. You and I talked about getting an apartment together. I don't even know these people. I don't want to live with them. Okay, that would be an example of a lie of omission. They left out a crucial fact that made a difference in how you interpreted the message. And the fourth type, equivocation, means giving vague or ambiguous information to create a false impression. So how does this happen? Well, you might see politicians do this a lot. If they're asked a question, they kind of give a nice answer, but it doesn't really answer the question they were asked, or they go off on a tangent. Equivocation is used a lot of times by people who are asked to give job references, because someone will ask you, should we hire this person? What can you tell us about them? And you might say, oh, well, he was always very punctual for work. You try to say something positive when maybe your overall feelings about the person are not positive. They ask you, will this person be a good employee? And you might answer, well, they always got their assignments in on time or something like that. You're really not giving your opinion on whether they'd be a good employee or not. You're offering something else instead. So when you're kind of skirting the answer or not answering the question that's asked, but saying something similar in the hopes that they won't press you on the question, that would be equivocation. Now, why would we engage in these deceptive behaviors? Lying is wrong, right? Well, there's this saying that deception is a social lubricant, meaning that the truth is not always the ideal way to connect with other people. If you recall politeness theory from chapter 2, we talked about face saving. And face saving is the idea of saving yourself or the other person from embarrassment or indignity. So sometimes we say things to save another person from embarrassment when they're not entirely true. There are times when honesty is considered unkind. If you're about to go to a party and your friend comes out and says, how do I look? And you really don't like their dress or their outfit, but you might tell them they look good because they're feeling themselves, and maybe there isn't time to change. You might be helping a friend pick out a new pair of shoes and you know they really like something and you don't like it, but you tell them that, oh, they look great on you, right? Or that's a lovely color on you, something like that. You're trying to make them feel good and to spare them from embarrassment, to spare yourself from saying something that might be interpreted as rude. So in this case, you are lying, but apparently with a good intention behind it. So you are trying to help the person to save face. So that's what we mean when we say that deception is a social lubricant. Let's examine a list of reasons why we might deceive. First, to protect our privacy. Somebody might ask you something that's just none of their business and you don't want them to know, so you tell them something different. They might ask you how much you weigh or something like that. They've crossed the line and asked something that was inappropriate given your relationship, and you just tell them something that isn't true. To avoid conflict, especially in interpersonal relationships, especially with a significant other, we might lie to them about where we were, what we were up to, just because we don't want to get into the conflict that would result. Similarly, we might lie to avoid punishment. We do this when we're kids quite a lot. Some of us do. You might tell mom and dad that you were doing something different than what you were doing to avoid getting grounded or having to argue. To avoid distress, you might know that telling another person the truth is going to cause a lot of heartache and bad feelings and maybe embarrassment for you, and you don't want to be subjected to that distress, so you just keep the truth to yourself in that case. To make ourselves look better, you might lie about your job title or some accomplishment that you have in order to make yourself look better, but it isn't entirely true. And of course, we have many other reasons to deceive too, most of which have to do with protecting ourselves from some sort of negative consequence. If you've ever taken a class in ethics or philosophy, you've probably encountered the idea of ethical perspectives. And we're going to talk about 3, but there are a lot more. These are mindsets about right and wrong that can influence the way a person behaves. And each of these ethical perspectives we'll talk about can drive the way that you feel about whether you should ever speak deceptively or not. For example, the first one, Kant's categorical imperative. This is the idea that there's an absolute right and an absolute wrong in any given situation, and that you should always do the right thing. You should always choose that, whether or not it's going to hurt you, hurt the other person, or result in a bad outcome. This is the idea that honesty is the best policy and that you should be honest 100% of the time. So you probably know people who are governed by this philosophical and ethical perspective, that the truth is what should prevail in any and all circumstances. The second ethical perspective I'd like to look at right now is called utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is the idea that you do things for the greater good, and that justifies the action. So you're making your choice according to what will be the best end result, in your opinion, for the most prominent group of people or the biggest number of people. So an example of utilitarianism that I can think of is when I was working for a big corporate bank and there were rumors that the bank was going to be sold. We had groups of people from the FDIC coming in and looking through our files. We had a lot of just people, executives from other banks coming in, and it looked suspicious. It looked like the bank was about to be sold. Plus, those were the rumors out there in the marketplace. But our management told us that, no, there's nothing to worry about. The bank isn't going to be sold. Well, lo and behold, one Monday morning we came in and there was a packet on each of our desks that said, the bank's been sold and you now work for this other company. They deliberately deceived us about that or were not forthcoming with that information. But the reasons they gave were things like they didn't want it to affect the stock price, which would in turn affect the value of the stock that a lot of us held. They didn't want panic among the employees. They didn't want employees taking personal accounts to other banks, things like that. So they were using those kind of reasons to justify the deception. That would be an example of utilitarianism. Think of something as utility. It's a practical thing. It serves a specific purpose. And then the third ethical perspective that might drive how you speak truthfully or deceptively is called altruism. This is a word that you might be familiar with. It's the idea of kindness or politeness, and that kindness should prevail in all situations, that you should be selfless and do things for other people. So someone who is governed by the ethical principle of altruism is always going to do the nice thing, whether it's necessarily the truthful thing or not. So this is the person who would really be governed by politeness theory and would tell you you look great if you really don't, or something like that, in order to do the kindest thing. Let's talk about high stakes lies and low stakes lies. And the idea of stakes means the outcome, the punishment, or the result. Is it really important and really dramatic or not? Okay, so let's start by looking at high stakes lies, the kind where the outcome is very heavy and important and could be dramatic. These are lies for which the penalties for being caught are severe, so they're highly risky. And these penalties are socially sanctioned penalties. Okay, they're penalties our society imposes upon us. So we might get arrested, we might go to jail, we might have to pay a big fine, we might be socially ostracized. There's a lot on the line with these kind of lies. And some of these high stakes lies, some examples would be things like forgery, where you're maybe signing a check that isn't yours, impersonating somebody else, identity theft, which can go hand in hand, fraud, which is deceiving in order to make money, or perjury, lying under oath in court. All of those kind of lies, and you can probably think of some others, have really severe penalties attached to them, and they're severe social penalties. So they're highly risky and very scary to commit, and many people avoid committing them because of the possible outcome. So let's contrast those with low stakes lies. Low stakes meaning that the possible punishment, negative result, negative outcome are maybe not as serious, and they're usually more personal than social. The penalties for being caught in a low stakes lie are usually emotionally uncomfortable, but they're not going to land you in jail or anything like that. Low stakes lies are lies you might tell to your family, friends, significant others. And the penalties for being caught are things like those listed here: guilt, embarrassment, erosion of trust. So these can be damaging to the relationship. They won't necessarily be damaging to your public reputation or cost you a lot of time or money, but they're more intimate and damaging to the positive dynamic that you've built with somebody else. What are some ways that we can detect deception? You've probably heard some little tips like, oh, if somebody touches their chin, they might be lying or something like that. But it's a bit more complex than that. The motivation impairment effect tells us that when someone is trying to get you to believe a high stakes lie, they're not going to be behaving normally because they're going to be hyper focused on getting you to believe this lie. And that's going to have an effect on their normal behavior. This is especially useful if you do know somebody well. So the motivation impairment effect says that attempting to succeed in a high-stakes lie impairs the deceiver's nonverbal performance, making the lie less likely to be believed. Okay, that's a lot. What does that mean? Well, it impairs their nonverbal performance. So things like vocal fillers, they might use a lot of ums and uhs and be stuttering. They might be overly smiling. They might be fidgeting in ways they normally don't do. So if you know the person, especially, this can be useful. Lying, especially in a high stakes situation, requires heightened focus to pull it off. So there's a heightened focus on what they're saying. They're kind of wound up, they're on in a way that they might not normally be. And if you're the recipient of that communication, you're going to notice something's unnatural about their behavior, and that will cause you to question the truthfulness of their statements. Here's a list of some other things that can help you to detect deception. The first is be aware of your truth bias, especially toward friends and loved ones. Truth bias is the idea that we tend to believe certain people. We tend to trust them. We have a bias toward them, that they are truthful, that they aren't lying. Okay, so a parent might have a truth bias toward a child, or spouses might have a truth bias with each other. And in the case where you suspect deception, it's useful to reflect on whether truth bias is having an effect on your opinion. Information inconsistency is another way to detect deception. This is why police will have someone who witnessed a crime tell the story over and over and over and over again. Or in the courtroom, a defendant might be asked the same question over and over and over and over again. They're looking for information inconsistency, or if the story is being told the same way every time. Or are people embellishing and adding details that weren't there before? As I mentioned earlier, increased speech errors and vocal fillers that are not normal to that person could be an indication of deception, because if you're making up the story as you go along, you might be umming and ahhing a lot. Increased use of false smiles, again, if that is not normal for the person, it might trigger a suspicion in you. And note that liars overcompensate. This is that motivation impairment effect. So don't rely on things like, oh, they avoid eye contact, or they rub their nose, or some of those cliches you've heard. Liars know about those too. And so some of them might overcompensate by making sure they maintain eye contact when they're lying, or purposely avoiding touching their face because they know those are indications, commonly thought indications of lying. So I wouldn't rely on those little body language cliches that we hear about all the time, but rely on more of these other elements that we've discussed. So as usual, you have a quiz and a worksheet this week, and the worksheet activity relies on this list of types of deceptive acts. So to review, we did this a few minutes ago. Falsification is an outright lie. Exaggeration is overstating something that is true in principle. Omission is leaving out parts of the story. Equivocation is when you kind of hedge around something and give a different answer than what the question is asking for. Okay? So make sure you understand those four, and then you'll want to go to the Chapter 12 materials folder and look at the activity in there. In the Chapter 12 folder, you'll find the video clip that goes along with your activity. So you're going to watch this clip from Everybody Loves Raymond, which is quite a funny one. It's full of lies flying back and forth. And you'll want to take your worksheet and see if you can identify the different types of lies in this clip. It should be fun. And don't forget to complete that and upload it to the Dropbox by 5 o'clock on the 16th. Also remember to do your quiz and start getting ready for the final exam, which is cumulative, but will concentrate on the later material in the semester. But you do want to go back and review the earlier material as well. I suggest that you go through those chapter objectives, those bullet points at the beginning of each chapter, review them, make sure you can still do all of those things that will put you in a good spot, make you well prepared. Another thing about preparing for the final, it will be online. You will have 2 hours, which is what you would have in the classroom. There will not be time to look things up. If you're planning on getting by with open book and open notes, but not reviewing the chapters, I think you're going to be disappointed in the outcome. I do write application questions, remember, and that requires you to know the material in order to answer the question. It's not a matter of just looking up a definition. So, for example, I might give a little story and say which kind of power is represented here, and your answer choices are going to be all the different kinds of power. So you'll have to know what all of those different kinds mean in order to attach the right one to the question. So trying to learn about all the types of power in that moment during the exam is going to eat up too much time for you. So please review as you would for an exam in the classroom. That's how you'll be able to do your very best on the final. Okay? If you have any questions or problems, Gina and I are available by email, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.